For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. The Heidi Game. I've gone over this game so many times on this channel before that I'm not going to dive too much into the weeds of it here. However, if you want to learn more about the intricacies of that game, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Long story short, it's the biggest broadcasting controversy in the history of professional football, and maybe professional sports. And it's the reason that you don't see networks cutting away from NFL games early, or in this case, AFL games, to show completely unrelated programming. The New York Jets were leading at 32-29 late in the fourth quarter, but with the game running past the 3 hours allotted to it, and with NBC wanting to show the movie Heidi to appeal to families and kids, NBC decided to switch away from the game on the East Coast, meaning that viewers missed the ending to the game, and were stunned to find out the next day that no, the Jets did not win the game. In fact, it was the Raiders who won 43-32. But apparently, as crazy as it's gonna sound, NBC didn't learn its lesson. Because about 1 decade later, during this game right here, they once again preempted the end of an NFL game in order to show completely unrelated family programming to appeal to that demographic. You thought that NBC learned its lesson from this debacle? You thought that NBC, when the Willy Wonka controversy happened in 1975, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, officially drew a hard line in the sand and said that the ending of a football game would always win out over family programming? Well, think again. But before you think, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. We're trying to hit 60,000 subs on the channel. Your support would be greatly appreciated, and thanks again in advance. This controversy has been forgotten about 45 years later, because unlike the Heidi Game, the outcome of the final result did not change in the slightest bit. But it's a story that we need to dissect today for how bizarre it was. Because this is the story behind the 1979 game between the New England Patriots and the Denver Broncos, and what turned out to be yet another example of a Heidi Game and an NBC broadcasting controversy. Before I talk about the decision that NBC made and the dilemma that they were faced with when it came to a football game versus family programming, we need some context to understand the importance of this game right here, and how the game was going. It's November 11th, 1979. It's week 11 of the NFL season, and as we're comfortably in the second half of the year, we've got one of the biggest games of the season on our hands between the Denver Broncos and the New England Patriots over at Mile High Stadium. NBC had the national doubleheader this week, so they got to air a game at 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock Eastern, and this was their marquee game. This was essentially America's Game of the Week, with the #1 pairing of Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen on the call. And when you break it down, it's not hard to see why. In one corner, you had the New England Patriots, who were 7-3 and atop the AFC East after winning 4 of their last 5 games. In the other corner, you had the Denver Broncos, who were also 7-3 and were also winners of 4 of their last 5. If you want to learn more about one particular game that they won earlier in the season, a thrilling 37-34 win against the Seattle Seahawks, to get to this point, you can do so by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Not only did you have 2 incredible teams who were well within the playoff hunt, but you also had 2 teams with not a lot of margin for error, seeing as only 5 teams in each conference made the playoffs. And at this point, 6 teams were sitting at 7-3 or better, and 2 others were 6-4. The winner of this game goes a long way towards solidifying their playoff spot in front of a de facto national television audience in the marquee game of the day. While the loser, while not necessarily in trouble by any means, will definitely have their work cut out for them the rest of the way. So everyone expected a pretty good game, right? 2 teams with identical records, a game that's basically a pick'em, with the Patriots favored in Vegas by just 1 point, and a battle between the #2 offense in the AFC in the Patriots and the #2 defense in the AFC in the Broncos. This should be solid, right? Well, not quite. In fact, It was anything but that, as this game quickly got ugly and became one of the most disappointing games of the season and the entire 1970s. Everything about this game, as you're probably able to tell from the highlights or lowlights if you're a Patriots fan, was ugly with a capital U, as with 5 minutes left in the contest, the Denver Broncos were hammering the Patriots, winning it by a final score of 45-10. Denver jumped out to a 24-0 lead at the end of the first quarter, which was 4 possessions back then since the 2-point conversion did not exist. And by the end of the first half, thanks to 2 touchdowns on defense and special teams, the Broncos led it 38-7, looking as though they were in complete control of the game, up by 5 scores. Denver outgained New England in total yardage 289-92, basically tripling their output there. Denver had about 6 times more net passing yards than New England, winning that battle 182-34. Denver had more than 2.5 times the number of first downs that New England had, winning that battle 21-8. Denver had double the rushing yards that New England had, winning that battle 107-58. And starting quarterback Steve Grogan for the Patriots, who was really good in 1979 and actually led the NFL in passing touchdowns that season, was absolutely terrible in this one, as despite starting the game, he went 2 for 13, completing 15% of his passes with no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a passer rating of 7.5, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. He was eventually pulled for Tom Owen, but for some perspective on how bad Grogan was and how good Denver's defense was, Grogan threw for 23 yards and was sacked for 28, meaning that he actually finished the game with -5 net passing yards. Yes, you heard that right. -5 net passing yards. If you are watching this video, I don't care if you weren't even born yet. Congratulations! You had more net passing yards on this day than Steve Grogan had. It was that kind of day, where about the only interesting thing was that it started snowing in the second half of the contest. And who doesn't love a good snow game on TV? And this game contained the perfect recipe for running long. You had a ton of scores, which featured a ton of possession changes. That stops the clock. You had a ton of incomplete passes, even if, as mentioned before, Steve Grogan was the one throwing the vast majority of them. That stops the clock. You had a ton of penalties, with 15 penalties committed throughout the contest. That stops the clock. And this meant that this game right here, which started at 4 o'clock Eastern, well, it wasn't ending by 7 o'clock. We were 3 hours into the contest, and we still had 5 minutes to play, with the Broncos comfortably leading it by a score of 45-10. And at this point, NBC had a dilemma, because with the game running long, it could not only mess up the rest of their programming block for the rest of the night, but it meant that everything could get out of order when they tried to air their program after the game. That program? Well, that was Disney's Wonderful World, which was going to be a presentation of this movie right here, The Strongest Man in the World. If you don't know the premise behind that 1975 movie, the TV guide says that it's about a college student who eats a bowl of cereal and turns into a Superman. Just think, folks, if you think Disney is out of ideas today with their sequels and live-action remakes, remember that it can always be worse. Kurt Russell's in this movie, though, before he fought Chris Pratt and tried to kill the US national hockey team. This was a 2-hour movie set to air from 7 o'clock Eastern to 9 o'clock Eastern, and it was clearly designed to appeal to kids and families. Each of the big 3 networks had their lane that they stayed in on Sunday nights at 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. If you wanted the news, you watched 60 Minutes on CBS. If you wanted family programming, you watched NBC. And if you wanted science fiction programming and drama, you watched ABC with shows like Salvage 1 and Galactica 1980. But let's be honest, no one was watching ABC from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock during that time period. Anyways, this 2-hour movie was posing a problem for NBC, because think about it. The football game is running long. This means that if you stick with the end of the football game, the movie isn't going to start on time and will end late, because you still have to squeeze in all of the commercials in the appropriate blocks. And who watches programming like this? Kids, as in a demographic that has to go to bed because they have school the next day. Many kids aren't allowed up past 9 o'clock. So if you delay the start of this movie, you're asking for the ratings to be absolutely terrible and take a nosedive and lose to the competition. So NBC had a decision to make. Do we take the game off and show our family programming so people could see Strongest Man in the World? Which, from everything I could find, was the only time on any network the entire year that this movie was being aired, so it was a watch it now or miss it kind of deal. Or do we show the ending of this game right here? And obviously, if the game was even remotely close, there is no decision to make whatsoever. NBC shows the ending of the game, or else they face the furor from the NFL and risk repeating the same mistake as the Heidi Game. Trust me, if the Broncos were leading this 27-24, or 27-17, or heck, even 27-10, this game is not being flipped off. But 45-10? A 35-point game with 5 minutes left? At the time, the largest comeback in NFL history by any team was 24 points. The record was 4 possessions. This, though, was a 35-point game, and a 5-possession game with 5 minutes left in the contest. What are the honest-to-God odds that the Patriots, down 45-10, score a touchdown, get the extra point, recover an onside kick, score another touchdown, get the extra point, recover an onside kick, score another touchdown, get an extra point, recover an onside kick, score another touchdown, get an extra point, recover an onside kick, score another touchdown, and get an extra point? In a 5-minute stretch? It's impossible. Even in a video game, it's impossible. There is no universe and no scenario where you come back from that. The backups were in by this point. The game was over, and everyone knew that Denver was going to win in convincing fashion. This is the equivalent of a basketball team being up by 25 points with 40 seconds left in the fourth quarter, or a hockey team being up by 5 goals with a minute left in the game, or a golfer being up by 6 strokes and on the 18th green. You know the end result, and people even on the winning side are emptying the stands early because the game is over. It's a formality, it's a done deal. And because of that, NBC made the decision, as controversial as it might have been considering their history, to do another Heidi Game. The West Coast wasn't impacted by this at all, because it was still 4 o'clock over there, and Strongest Man in the World wasn't airing until 7 o'clock local time, so they got to watch the end of the game. And in Boston and Denver, they weren't impacted by this at all, because there was an NFL mandate saying that no matter what, a network in the market of the two teams playing, provided that the game is televised and isn't blacked out, must stay with the game until its conclusion, regardless of the score. So if you were on the West Coast, if you were in Denver, or you were in Boston, you got to see the end of this game. But the rest of the country? Nope. The rest of the country saw the broadcast sign off with 5 minutes left in the game, and the Broncos leading 45-10, and saw NBC switch to the Kurt Russell movie about cereal that gives you superpowers, because that was apparently a real movie that existed. A Heidi Game where you really ended up missing nothing, but a Heidi Game nonetheless. As for what happened after the game between these teams behind me right here, or I guess during the game between these teams behind me right here, NBC seemed to make the right call with this decision according to the Nielsen ratings. Disney's Wonderful World was the 30th most watched primetime program that week among the big 3 networks. Obviously, it doesn't sound great on paper, but it's higher than where they usually finish. They were outside the top 30 most weeks, so to be 30th, not too shabby. They ranked number 2 among programming from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Obviously well behind 60 Minutes on CBS, but well ahead of Salvage 1 on ABC. So again, NBC seemed to make the right call by doing this and by pulling a Heidi Game, even if they ticked off a lot of football fans who wanted to watch the end to this massacre of a football game. And speaking of switching away from games early, you know I had to do a video like this after what happened earlier this week in the Stanley Cup playoffs with ESPN in the game between the Carolina Hurricanes and the New York Rangers. Because seriously, what the heck was that, ESPN? Is it ever okay for a network, out of market, to cut away from a sporting event early to show something completely unrelated? Well, in 1979, NBC had that dilemma when they had another Heidi Game moment, even though no one was shocked to find when they read the newspapers the next day that the Broncos held on by the exact same scoreline and won at 45-10. Out-of-market Bronco and Patriot fans, however many Patriot fans were even left watching this massacre at this point, might have been upset, and rightfully so. But I'm sure the vast majority of the country was not upset at the family movie starting on time, and was not upset that they didn't have to stay up late and be subjected to a blowout football game. But on this November day in 1979, Disney's Wonderful World was anything but that for NFL fans who wanted to watch the ending to this game. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.